Well, why don't we get started? We do have a full agenda today with a guest speaker and then Zach and Lauren to follow. Thank you everybody for joining us today with the industry update. I know people will be joining us as we go along, but we want to be timely with everybody's time. As always, we're recording this and we'll send this out later in the day. We do use the chat feature and ask that you remember to use that if you have any questions. We do have some guest speakers with us today. I wanted to welcome Christine Heiser with the Department of Human Services. She did bring along a contingency with her, and I will let her do the introducing of all of them. But she is going to be talking to us a little bit about PRLA members and working with the impact when there is a disaster and feeding people when they are, affected by disasters in the areas, and how restaurants can participate and help with that initiative. So with that, Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Eric will help you get through the slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so glad for the opportunity to be here today with some of my colleagues to talk about how PRLA members can help feed folks in Pennsylvania who've been impacted by disasters. So you can advance the slide, Eric. So my name is Christine Heiser. I'm with the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, and I just want to give you a little bit of background about disaster response in Pennsylvania. So disasters generally begin locally. A lot of times the response is handled right at that local level with the municipality or the county and the local voluntary organizations, including the Red Cross. The state doesn't just show up, and FEMA doesn't just show up, but when something escalates to a level above what the local folks can handle, that's when my agency, the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, would have a role in coordinating disaster response, including feeding operations. So at the state level, PEMA coordinates the disaster response, and they've designated PADHS as that lead for mass care, which includes sheltering and feeding. I also wanted to give a plug for PEMA's Business Emergency Operations Center. They have a really great trusted partners list where they push out trusted information about disasters and steady state things that are going on, preparedness, business continuity, all kinds of great stuff. So I'll have a survey at the end of the presentation here if you want to sign up to get involved with the Business Emergency Operations Center. Some of you may know my colleague over at PEMA, Molly Dougherty, Director of External Affairs. So Molly was instrumental in connecting us with PRLA during the early days of the pandemic. PRLA was a great partner on our disaster feeding task force. So our feeding task force is to coordinate food needs during large-scale disasters. We have a lot of different partners on our task force. We're over 300 partners strong. We have not just state agency reps, but governmental partners at all levels, volunteer organizations, and private sector partners. And throughout the pandemic, we really saw how important our private sector partners were. And my friend and colleague, David Marks, at Operation BBQ Relief, is going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. So the idea of the task force is to be able to coordinate a response that is above and beyond what any one organization can handle. So we know government can't do it alone, charitable feeding organizations can't do it alone, the volunteer organizations can't do it alone, and we really need to loop in our private sector partners like you guys. So I want to be clear that we are not here to solicit donations from our restaurant partners. Funding mechanisms will depend on the status of disaster declarations. I'm not going to get too much into that, but I just wanted to be clear that we're not soliciting donations here. If I was asking you to be involved in providing meals to feed people who needed food in times of disaster, you would be paid for those meals. So just wanted to state that up front. With the task force, if we can dream it, we can do it collectively. So if we have, say we have a need for 1,000 meals, we have one organization that can do 500, one that can do 100. We have somebody who can provide the food product. We have somebody who can provide volunteers or transportation or cold storage space. Collectively, we can meet that capability to feed people who've been impacted by disaster. So everybody kind of has a piece of the pie, and the feeding task force helps coordinate that. So PRLA had an important connection through our feeding task force that enabled us to do almost 4 million meals during COVID through a really unique partnership. So I'm going to turn things over to David Marks with Operation BBQ Relief to talk about a little bit more of what that looks like from the restaurant side, because David is also a restaurateur. So you can also feel free to pop any questions in the chat at any time through this presentation. So go ahead, David, take it away.
Thank you, Christine. Honestly, it's an honor to be here. It's really cool for me to be here because this is the intersection of my life. I do have a hotel restaurant degree. I am a restaurateur and have been since early days when I had a full head of hair. I have a great depth and breadth of understanding of what you all go through on a daily basis. I have owned and operated restaurants in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. So I definitely understand and appreciate what you all are going through currently, have gone through, and will go through in the future. So with all that being said, that's also part of how this worked so well. We were able to lever some of my personal intellectual knowledge, the industry's intellectual knowledge, the folks that Christine talked about earlier. There are so many people, so many great ideas. We were able to lever a lot of those ideas into just a mass production of food. We produced 3.9 million meals in 9 weeks, and that did not happen overnight by any means. We brought on restaurants and, in one case, a hotel, caterers and the like, to help create this coalition to make all these meals. We created a win-win solution for everyone involved. Frankly, think yourselves back to early COVID, and now everybody's still struggling and fighting to get through today, but think back early COVID, we had no idea what was going to happen. We actually enlisted 13 different restaurants and caterers and hotels. They were provided with meal planning, menu planning. They were provided with food. They were provided with supplies, dry goods. The restaurants themselves provided a safe, healthy environment where food could be produced safely. They provided the employees and the chemicals needed to keep that environment safe and clean. Together, we provided logistics, freezers. In some cases, some of the restaurants, hotels provided some logistics services, some did not. We did pay those restaurants based on the meal. And if they provided logistics, there was an enhancement to what they were paid for the logistics side of the meal. We solved so many problems through providing freezers and the like, so many things that we learned along the way, like restaurant employees know how to make food, but they don't know how to palletize. They don't know how to put things together. We did on the fly videos, learnings, and tutorials. We personally went in and checked on every restaurant to make sure that things were doing. So we provided some oversight and some inspections. So ultimately, the restaurants were paid. We re-employed in some cases. We employed people in some cases. We kept businesses running in many cases. It was an amazing feat to be part of. I'm humbled and proud to see that intersection of my life come through to ultimately give a real sense of purpose for our employees, and more importantly, provide a hot meal for many folks who didn't know where their next meal was coming from. So with that, I be happy to answer any questions or move on, Christine.
Thanks so much, David. Always appreciate your partnership. I want to turn now to our partners at the American Red Cross. We have Bill, Jeff, and Janice on the line today. So Bill, I'll turn things over to you to talk a little bit about the Red Cross's role in disaster feeding and how that may connect with restaurants.
Yeah, and let me say that I am the lead representative for the Red Cross at Pima. The feeding experts are Jeff Banks and Janice Thomas. At the end, you're going to have contact information for them. If you're in the 5-county Philadelphia area, Janice is your point of contact. Jeff is the point of contact for 61 of the remaining counties. Before you say Slaughter, that math doesn't add up. Susquehanna County is actually out of New York. So if you're out of Susquehanna County, I'll be happy to get you the point of contact there. Something that you may not appreciate is during disasters, the Red Cross serves a lot of food. The Red Cross cooks none of that food. We do not have any organic cooking capacity. We are either relying on restaurants, caterers, or large field kitchen providers. In a disaster, the restaurants and catering industry are preferred for us because that gets money back into the community and gets people fed. Large kitchens get people fed, but restaurants and caterers gets the money back into the community. There's really two types of feeding that we would do. One would be at the chapter level, and that's when you have the large apartment fire and we have to open a single shelter. Larger disasters that are multi-community, multi-county, we would move up to a regional response, and that is where this survey response to the business EOC really comes in handy, because in those larger responses, we'd be working with Christine and BEOC to determine caterers that would be willing to be out there and could serve the various communities. Nutritional requirements, nutritional and I would say dietary requirements are pretty much what you're used to in the restaurant business. We have the ethnic considerations, we have the dietary considerations, and we're always after low sodium. Serving sizes are 6 for the entree, 6 vegetable starch, 6 for the dessert, and packaging versus congregate. Individual packaging was a real concern, I want to say maybe about 6 months ago, back into 2020. Now that we have COVID has become more endemic and less pandemic, we are doing straight congregate feeding. So we're talking about containers pretty much like you saw in that slide, either something that would go in a Cambro that can be dished out, full trays, half trays, something like that. So we're not as particular about worrying about individual or congregate, individual servings for shelters. And the feeding that we do would be both in shelters, and if you've got power outages where people can't cook, people can't refrigerate, we'd be serving retail to the communities out of these trucks that we have, which are the feeding trucks. They're called emergency response vehicle. Basically, they're feeding trucks. They carry the food to the community. They do not cook the food. So we are very interested in such a partnership. I'm going to reserve the time now. If anybody has any particular questions, Jeff and Janice are on the line that could perhaps field those.
Jeff or Janice, did you want to make any additional comments? Oops, sorry, Bill, didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
there.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Christine. This is Jeff Banks. And unfortunately, I'm traveling and using my phone right now, so I apologize for not being on camera. I think Bill covered everything 100% that we're looking for. I have no additional, anything additional to add to this. Over to you, Janice.
Thank you, Jeff. And I don't have any additional comments either.
Bill, can I ask you to briefly describe the role of a feeding agreement with the local Red Cross chapter and a restaurant for catering purposes? Can you talk about the use of that type of agreement?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'm going to defer to either Jeff or Janice because they deal with that on a daily level. Jeff or Janice, could one of you talk about the feeding agreements?
Sure, I'll take that. So basically what the feeding agreement is we sit down with the restaurant owner and talk about what their particular capacity is, obviously reiterating what our meal requirements are, serving sizes, and what the pricing structure would be, how much time do they need to ramp up if we need 50 meals, if they have the capacity to do 300 for lunch, what kind of time do you need, how we're going to package those meals. And we call it a feeding agreement, but it's basically an MOU that in the unlikely event that we need to use that, we already have points of contact and a system for how to activate that particular vendor, to help us help the community during a time of need. I think the key to the agreement is that there's, it's something that we can establish today, and the local chapter continues to develop that relationship by contacting them periodically, just to make sure everything is still okay. And there may be opportunities on smaller events for single family fire where we may have 50 or so people displaced, that we'll be able to use them to help us to cater that particular event.
And Jeff, can you indicate what is the approximate price point that the Red Cross pays for catered meals?
So breakfast right now is about $8. Lunch is about $12, and dinner, believe so. And I'm just hesitant right now because due to all of the pricing increases and things that have been happening recently, we are, from a national standpoint, making some minor adjustments to that. But so it's going to be anywhere from $8 for breakfast up to $12, $15 for dinner. I will say that somewhat flexible. I'll give you an example. We had a Nepalese community that was displaced 50, 60 people. And because of their specific dietary requirements, we were at $16 a meal for that particular group. So that's probably the highest end that we are going to be. And did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. It's good to know that the Red Cross has that kind of flexibility with the current market conditions, and also that niche for some of the special dietary concerns is really something where we can lean on our private sector partners like local restaurants. Thank you. Any final comments, Bill, for the Red Cross?
No, just that, like I said, restaurants and caterers are our first go-to. So we're very interested in this partnership.
Thanks so much, Bill, Jeff, and Janice. And I just want to make a note for everyone that really partnership at the local level with your local Red Cross chapters is going to enable you to have the maximum impact. It's much more often that the Red Cross is helping folks who are displaced due to an apartment fire than it is for us to have a big feeding operation at the state level like we did for the pandemic. So just a little motivation to work with those local Red Cross contacts. Eric, you can go to the final slide here. So just to wrap up, if we have a large scale event and we have a specific ask for our restaurant partners, whether it's something like we need X number of meals, or we need halal meals, or we need a specific dietary need, or any other maybe technical assistance, we'll definitely reach out through PRLA. I want to give a huge shout out to Heidi from PRLA, a longtime participant on our feeding task force. She was instrumental all throughout COVID. So shout out to Heidi. You can expect to hear from us through the association if we have something big. But again, your top way of being able to help in times of disaster that happen more frequently is going to be through connections with the Red Cross. So to get involved, I would encourage you to take the survey. It's linked on the slide, or you can use the QR code just for us to collect your contact information. And you can check a box if you want us to connect you with your local Red Cross chapter. If you want to get connected with our disaster feeding task force. And there's two options there. I send out regular updates, a lot are related to COVID recovery and things of that nature, or you can check the box to just be added to the feeding task force list for big disaster activations. So your choice, regular contact, or if you're busy and don't want me filling up your inbox just for disaster activations, or you can wait to hear from PRLA if we have that ask. And then the last item you can select on that survey is to be connected with the Business Emergency Operations Center at PEMA. I'll connect you with those folks there. So you have our contact information. I think we're a little short on time now for any questions here. Want to be respectful of your agenda, but feel free to put anything in the chat that you have, and we're happy to address it. But thank you so much for having us on the call today. It was really a pleasure to have the opportunity to address your group.
Looks like there was this might be, well, there, Bob, what are a QR code for our daily news? I'll reach out to Bob separate on that. I don't see any other questions regarding your presentation, but thank you so much for getting on the call and putting out this information and letting everybody know how they can get involved. And we will definitely be partnering, as we have been through the whole pandemic and going forward, to make sure that we are reaching out when in need. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Zach and Lauren to pick up on the update.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you very much, Christine, David, and the rest of the team for joining us this morning. Good morning, everyone, and happy Webinar Wednesday. For those who I have not met yet, my name is Zak Pyzik, and I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association. I'm joined today by Lauren Brinjac, PRLA Senior Director of Government Affairs. Before we start, I do want to note that the webinar will be taking a summer break. You may have seen that in the chat. We plan to pick things back up in the fall. I believe that date is September 7th of 2022. The daily update and all other communications will continue as planned on their regular schedules. And of course, never ever hesitate to email or call us with questions or concerns. We're always happy to help. Lauren and I have a lot to cover today, and with that, we can jump right into it with some federal issues. I am going to kick things off by discussing some COVID-related travel requirements related to air travel. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit about the pre-travel testing requirement, which has recently been lifted. It finally happened, something we've been pushing for, something our national partners have been pushing for. As of Sunday, the requirement for travelers to test negative for COVID-19 before entering the United States has ended. Based on the case numbers that we're seeing and the increase in vaccine availability, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention cited a new phase of the pandemic, which is what led to this particular rule change. The requirement officially ended as of 12:01 a.m. on Sunday, June 12th. And so that means flights departing from to the U.S. Still need to be, flights departing to the U.S. from a foreign country no longer have to present a negative test result or any documentation of recovery in the past 90 days from COVID. So you may be asking, do foreign arrivals to the United States still need to be vaccinated? The answer to that question is yes. The vaccination requirement for foreign arrivals has not changed. Travelers 18 and older who are not U.S. citizens, U.S. nationals, or legal immigrants must be fully vaccinated to travel to the United States. Children under 17, however, are not required. The end of the testing requirement applies to all travelers previously required to present negative test results. This change only applies again to air travel, does not apply to other things like ferry port arrivals. And I'll be able to add a link to the chat with some additional detail on that in a moment. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Lauren to discuss a little bit about where we're at with RRF.
Thanks, Zach. Hi, everyone. As you probably all are aware by now, the U.S. Senate last month was unable to overcome a filibuster to begin debating legislation that would have replenished the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which was disappointing to all of us, but also not unexpected. Since that time, since that vote, our federal government affairs team at the National Restaurant Association has been in touch with key leaders on this issue in both the House and Senate on next steps. And they're reporting to us that unfortunately, there is no clear path forward for this legislation at this time. We and the National Association are continuing to monitor the situation closely. And if there is any available avenue to pursue this in the future, we certainly are prepared to jump on that. But unfortunately, there really is no momentum in Congress to address this issue right now, unfortunately. Despite that disappointing news, there are numerous other federal issues affecting the industry right now. And so on that note, and I think in more positive news, on Monday this week, the U.S. House of Representatives approved S 3580, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which is a bipartisan piece of legislation now heading to President Biden, who has indicated that he supports the legislation and will be signing it into law. The National Restaurant Association has advocated in support of this legislation, which seeks to address longstanding shipping concerns that have led to increased costs throughout the restaurant supply chain. This bill is the first major overhaul of shipping regulations since the 90s, and it will broaden the powers of the Federal Maritime Commission to address unfair business practices on the part of ocean carriers and marine terminal operators. The message from the National Restaurant Association is that they are hopeful, and we're hopeful as well, that passage of this bill will mark one important step in addressing some of the these long-standing supply chain and port disruption issues, and hopefully will help to lower inflation and ease some of the pressure on both businesses and consumers that we know everyone is feeling right now. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Zach to get into the state of our state legislature right now.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, state of the legislature. The Pennsylvania House and the Senate wrapped up a full and busy week of session last week, and true to budget month, they are in session again this week. Today is their last day of session this week, I believe, unless there's an update coming in real time. But no, it looks like today will be the last day of session this week. They will be back in Harrisburg next week as well, and the following to wrap up budget month. We are hearing, these are just rumors, but we are hearing that the budget could wrap up as soon as next Friday. Maybe wishful thinking, though. The tone has certainly shifted in Harrisburg post-election and at the Capitol. One important note to keep in mind, there are about 42 House members that are in their last term, which will certainly impact voting and decision-making at the Capitol. Additionally, some big players like the two majority appropriations chairs, both in the House and the Senate, lost their re-elections in the primary election. And this all happened in a primary election that was pressed up against a budget deadline. So now that we're through the primary election, we're seeing a lot of bills that have been sitting there, stuck in committee, finally starting to get some action. The dynamic in all four caucuses has really shifted over the last couple of weeks. For instance, when it comes to the extra American Rescue Plan money that is available, it does still look like a bulk of that funding would be housed in the rainy day fund rather than being used on other funding initiatives. But you never know. There's definitely been a little bit more talk about spending that money now than there has been at all the last couple months before the primary election. Meanwhile, the state's independent fiscal office is projecting greater than, I believe it was $5 billion decline in tax revenue in the coming year. And so that's where our leadership has been saying they intend to make sure that the state has enough funding to cover any of those potential losses moving forward. Both the Democrats and Republicans are calling for a reduction in the state's corporate net income tax, also pushing for an increase in the minimum wage, as you might have seen in the news. And then you've also may have seen that there's a lot of conversation on liquor-related legislation. We've been in close touch with leaders in both parties, in the House and the Senate, on that issue, and we're making sure that they're kept up to date on all of our positions. We've got a lot of legislation to cover, especially some of that liquor-related stuff. Lauren, what are we seeing when it comes to some of the legislation that's moving right now?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. As Zach has sort of implied, this is the time of year when bills are moving very quickly between the two legislative chambers in Harrisburg. That's definitely proving to be the case right now. I always, this time of year, sort of add the caveat to any legislative update I give that things really this time of year can turn on a dime. So the information I have is accurate as of now, but next week things definitely could shift, or even later today. And so that's why Zach and I are definitely closely attuned to what's happening at the Capitol right now. We have a number of pieces of legislation that we are working on that are in play right now. As you may have seen, last week, PRLA put out a press release and an action alert to our members in support of House Bill 2272. And this is the legislation that would pave the way towards privatizing Pennsylvania's state-run liquor system. This legislation, 2272, is different from previous liquor privatization proposals that we've seen over the last, several decades, in that it's in the form of a constitutional amendment. So it would need to be passed in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, so this year and then again in 2023. And then it would be put on the ballot for voters to ultimately decide on the question of whether they want to remove the state from the liquor business. We have been very supportive of this initiative. The House Liquor Control Committee last week voted to pass this legislation out of committee. That was on a party line vote of 14 Republicans in support and 10 Democrats opposed. While we were hopeful that the full House would vote on this legislation either at the end of last week or even this week, unfortunately, there are a number of groups opposed to this legislation and some concerns about it. as there always are when it comes to these liquor privatization efforts within the General Assembly. And as of right now, there does not seem to be a clear path forward for the legislature or for the legislation to come out of the House this month, or at least not at this moment. But we'll certainly let you know if anything changes on that front. In the meantime, PRLA continues to support other meaningful efforts to modernize our liquor code where we can do that. And to that end, and I'm going to jump a little bit out of order on our slide here, we are happy to see that House Bill 2049 is slated to receive second consideration in the House later today, actually. This is Representative Ryan McKenzie's bill that PRLA worked with him on towards the end of last year that would allow amusement parks to sell alcohol by utilizing a public venue license. As you may know, amusement parks in Pennsylvania right now usually obtain a restaurant liquor license in order to serve alcohol, which does not really match with the reality of the way that amusement parks operate. And a public venue license really would be more appropriate in this instance and is already used in Pennsylvania for venues like golf courses, hotels, ski resorts, etc. This bill was voted out of the House Liquor Control Committee late last year and hasn't seen any movement until now. But as Zach said, this is a time of year where a lot of pieces of legislation sort of shake loose from where they'd been sitting in committee. So this appears to move. We're supportive of the legislation, and we're also very appreciative of the advocacy and the work we've done with the Pennsylvania amusement parks and attractions in supporting this bill. Another bill that we are lobbying in support of that passed the Senate unanimously last week is Senate Bill 1212, sponsored by Senator Kristen Phillips Hill. This amends the liquor code to allow liquor licensees to use loudspeakers outside, provided that the sound does not exceed 75 decibels beyond their property line. This would apply to licensees in counties Class 2A through 8. The legislation is now in the House Liquor Control Committee. We are lobbying in support of getting the bill passed by the House as soon as possible. When or if it is passed and signed into law, the bill would be able to, the bill would take effect immediately. And so our liquor licensees would be able to take advantage of this, hopefully throughout the summer months while they're using their outdoor dining setups. Another PRLA supported bill that also passed the Senate unanimously last week addresses our outdated frozen dessert law. This is the bill sponsored by Senator Judy Ward that would rewrite the current dessert law and require frozen dessert tests to be conducted annually instead of monthly. This bill is in the House, and just a little while ago this morning, it was voted favorably out of the House Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. The next step for this bill is to be voted on by the full House, and then it would go to the governor for his signature. And lastly, as some of you may have seen, the Senate last week passed Senate Bill 1183. And this legislation would help boroughs and cities handle cases of illegal use of ATVs and dirt bikes. Currently, police can impound dirt bikes and ATVs that they catch on the street. However, they have to release them to their respective owners once the fines are paid. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Pat Brown, who, just as an aside, is the current chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee and one of the legislators Zach mentioned who lost his primary election last month. This legislation would allow law enforcement to seize the bike or ATV, and at that point they could sell or destroy them. So this legislation is really meant to crack down on these illegal uses of ATVs. And legislation, it would include cities like Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, Reading, and also based on a recent amendment would include Philadelphia as well. That bill's in the House now and is scheduled to be voted on by the Transportation Committee today. We've weighed in support of this bill, and hopefully it will get across the finish line sometime this month. Moving on to some of the issues that we are working on at the city level. Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure just finalized their guidelines to implement the city's now permanent outdoor dining and retail program. We were very happy to see this. The department, along with the city's Office of Nighttime Economy, earlier this week hosted a webinar to go over the updated guidelines and answer questions. We would encourage anyone in the city who plans to take advantage of this new outdoor dining license to visit the website to review the new guidelines. And a link to the webinar presentation is posted there as well. And I will drop the link into the chat here in a minute. During the presentation, the department noted that these guidelines continue to be an evolving process, and we can expect to see future updates as far as guidelines on the winterization of your outdoor setups, as well as guidelines on outdoor cooking. One item I would like to flag for members under these new finalized guidelines, the hours of operation for street cafes must be the same as the associated business, but no earlier than 7 a.m., no later than 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and then no later than 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday. However, the change here is that businesses in residential zoning districts are limited to hours of operation no later than 10 p.m., and that's every day, including Friday and Saturday. With that, I am going to hand things back to Zach for an update on some of our Philadelphia specific issues.
Thank you, Lauren. I'd like to start with some transportation benefits news. You guys might remember Councilmember Helen Gim introduced legislation that would require employers with 50 or more employees, full-time employees, establish a program that diverts wages for the employees pre-tax and would allow their employees to use that money for public transit passes, van pooling, bicycle expenses, other transportation related expenses. The bill number, I believe, was 220337. New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. have very similar programs. Almost all of those cities have lower thresholds, like including all businesses, but we've had conversations with Councilmember Gim's office about keeping that threshold at that 50 employee level, and they've been committed to that throughout the legislative process. For those of you using payroll software, this is something that I've been told can oftentimes be streamlined for you. This bill, again, would give Philadelphians about $280 a month to use for transportation costs. It only applies to employees working an average of 30 plus hours per week in Philadelphia for the same employer over the past year. So if the employer is not headquartered in Philly, the bill still applies, but if the employer has less than 50 full-time employees working in Philly, it would not apply. For instance, if you have 35 employees in Philadelphia, but then 35 employees in King of Prussia, it would not apply for you. You need 50 full-time employees specifically in Philadelphia. Councilmember Gim's bill passed the full council last week, 17-0. We expect Mayor Kenny to sign the bill. I believe last we checked, he was just waiting on a review from the law department. This would become effective December 31, 2022. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or concerns. In the meantime, we'll continue pushing updates on this in the daily update. Again, those employers that we've talked to that this would most impact have shared with us that as long as you're using the right software, this is something that that should hopefully come at no cost and could potentially even save some money since you would get out of having to pay any payroll tax on that amount that's earmarked. The PRLA team has also been in close touch with potential allies who may be able to help some of our operators with this sort of administrative responsibility. So again, feel free to reach out to PRLA if we can be helpful on that, and we'll include updates in the daily update. On the streetery regulations, streeteries, as you all know, are permanent in Philadelphia. However, we unfortunately do not have finalized regulations for you yet. Related to how those streeteries will be able to operate moving forward. We were expecting the city to finalize regs for the program in early May, but we have not seen those yet. As of now, we are in a holding pattern, but we will certainly let you all know as soon as we get more info on that. Until they are finalized, from what I understand, things are able to operate as they have been. I also wanted to flag the third-party delivery app legislation that we passed fairly recently. As it relates to contract renewals. Many of you already know this, but I'm hoping to flag this as a reminder. PRLA worked with Philly City Council late last year and early this year to pass legislation that allows for a permanent cap on delivery and marketing fees that third-party app companies can charge food service establishments in Philadelphia. Those caps are now set at 10% for delivery and 5% for marketing. The legislation does allow restaurants to opt out of those fees and opt into more premium services if they'd like to. And that's mostly because when we were vetting this legislation, we've heard from many of you, a lot of restaurants that do take advantage of some of the more premium packages. That said, you can also stay at the basic cap rates if you'd like to. Many of the companies have started their contract renewal processes. We recommend that you take a close look at your contract to assure that the rates are set where you'd like them to be. Again, if you'd like to upgrade to more premium services, you can do that. But if you'd like to stay locked in at those legislated capped rates, you can do that as well. PRLA has been in close touch with all the major companies. Ben Fletcher and at PRLA and some others on our team have been in close contact with those companies. If you have any issues, we've been told that you can simply email your account manager saying that you'd like to stay at the basic cap rates. We've been assured by each company that those rates will be honored. And please feel free to reach out to us if you, for any reason, receive any sort of pushback. We've heard from some members who may not have initially seen these changes in their contract renewals. And so it may be worth reaching out to these companies regardless, just to double check that your rates are where you'd like them to be. And feel free to contact Ben or I or anybody else on the PRLA team if we can be helpful with this. In the meantime, we are happy to help. I also want to talk a little bit about the World Cup, especially as it relates to our travel and tourism industries. Philadelphia is looking to potentially serve as a host city for the highly anticipated 2026 World Cup. They plan to announce the host city on Thursday, June 16th, so tomorrow. Here in anticipation of the announcement, Philly is hosting a watch party at Love Park in Center City tomorrow. The event will kick off at 3 p.m. near City Hall with a pep rally, and I'm told it will run until about 6:30 or 7 p.m. FIFA will be live broadcasting their announcement from New York at about 5 or 6 p.m. tomorrow. They will be choosing 10 of 11 U.S. cities for various matches, but there are 17 potential U.S. cities that may be selected to host, including Philadelphia. And I know we are also up against Baltimore, New York, New Jersey. New York, New Jersey just kind of, goes in on a joint application, Washington, D.C., Boston, Dallas, Los Angeles. And so some very exciting stuff here happening in the tourism realm in Philadelphia, crossing our fingers that Philly may be selected. If chosen, Philly will host 5 of the 6 international soccer matches between June 1 and July 15th. About 191 million people worldwide tune into the average World Cup match, which is nearly double the audience of the Super Bowl. Greg Karen, CEO of the Philly Convention and Visitors Bureau, has estimated that World Cup matches could bring upward of 450,000 attendees to the city and could spur a direct spend of $262 million with an economic impact of $460 million. And so again, some very exciting stuff happening in Philadelphia, and we will keep you all posted. With that, I want to turn over now to some FYIs. For starters, there are some new faces in the Senate. Last week, we welcomed one new face in the Senate. Congratulations to Democratic State Senator Jimmy Dillon, who was sworn in to serve as Pennsylvania's fifth senatorial district. Senator Dillon will replace Senator John Sabatina. Dillon won a special election on May 17th and will complete the final 2 years of that term. He has said that he will focus on community safety, education, and labor issues. Looking forward to working with Senator Dillon moving forward. In similar news, Mike Driscoll retired from the Pennsylvania House. That was effective on June 9th. And Representative Driscoll, who represented the 173rd District, will assume his new position as a Philadelphia council member. And I believe he just started casting votes in Philadelphia at last week's council session. Driscoll ran to replace Bobby Heenan in a special election. Congratulations to Councilmember Driscoll on this new adventure. Also, while we're talking about Philadelphia, I wanted to flag for you some news about Reading Terminal. You might have seen this already, some very exciting stuff happening at Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia. There will be a $1 million project to turn the road next to Reading Terminal Market into a festival street. It was originally announced, I believe, pre-pandemic back in 2019. The project will revamp the 1-block stretch of Filbert Street. It'll create a curbless multi-purpose street where car lanes will be the same height as the sidewalks of the block. And a portion of the sidewalk will actually be widened to, I believe, 8 feet to allow for additional dining and seating capacity when weather is good. They expect the project to be done by the fall. We'll keep everyone posted on any updates to that project over the next couple months. Next on this list here is Oz McCormick. The results of the recount in the Dr. Oz and Dave McCormick Senate primary were finalized midweek last week. McCormick had already conceded the election, but once it was finalized, Dr. Oz had ended up winning by 951 votes. So another good, real example as to why every vote matters. This sets the stage for an Oz Fetterman general election to replace Senator Pat Toomey. Fireworks. The State House last week approved legislation that would add restrictions to the state's fireworks law in what would be the first major update to the law since the state legalized consumer fireworks sales to Pennsylvania residents about 5 years ago. House Bill 2157, I believe, is the bill number, passed 160 to 38, with the opposition coming from some Republican lawmakers. The legislation would extend the distance to 150 feet from buildings and vehicles where fireworks could be used. It would prohibit usage between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m., except during the July 4th holiday and on New Year's Eve. And it would give municipalities the option to ban their usage most of the year if they so choose, except they are not allowed to ban them on Memorial Day and Labor Day weekends and the aforementioned holidays of New Year's Eve and July 4th as well. This bill would also require competent knowledge of safety and handling to set off display fireworks. They would drop it to $2 million worth of insurance. The $2 million insurance requirement now would be dropped to $1 million if this passes. And the increase, I believe, to the distance requirement would go from 150 feet to 300 feet. It would also require written notification, 72 hours if consumer fireworks are going to be shut off. The measure now goes to the Senate, where similar proposals have already been introduced. I think it's been Senator Mario Scavello from the Monroe County area leading that effort. So again, a lot of moving pieces right now. We are keeping close tabs on all of this stuff, and we'll include updates on our social media pages and in our daily update. I'm going to turn things back over to Lauren to discuss the PRLA PAC.
Thanks, Zach. We always say here that good legislation begins with good lawmakers. PRLA's PAC really is a critical part of our government affairs program here. It allows us to both build relationships with lawmakers and support the election of candidates who understand and want to learn more about the issues facing the hospitality industry in Pennsylvania. Just within the last week alone, Zach and I were able to go to numerous events for both Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate. And that's thanks to the support of PRLA's PAC from all of you. If you haven't contributed to our PAC yet this year, I would encourage you to do so as soon as possible. This year being a pretty big election year, it's more important than ever. We get requests for help from candidates and lawmakers on a daily basis, and the extent to which we can get involved in some of these critical House and Senate races depends on, the size and strength of our PAC on any given day. And we're really trying to build that up this year. And finally, to round things out here, I would just like to note that we will be continuing our series of legislative roundtables around the state. We're taking a little July break, but we'll start back up in August. The roundtables that we've had so far this year, most recently in Lancaster, have really been great opportunities for our members to have candid conversations with their local legislators in district. Our next two roundtables are scheduled for Monday, August 1st at 3 p.m. That's with our central chapter, and that will be at the Sheraton Harrisburg Hershey Hotel. And then our Northwestern chapter roundtable will be Thursday, August 4th. That's at 3 p.m. at the brewery at Union Station in Erie. We hope to see many of you there and anticipate having good legislative turnout for that as well. And with that, unless there are any questions in the chat, I will turn it back over to Hope.
Great, thank you guys. Great update. And on top of the roundtables that Lauren was discussing, we will be having some events coming up though this summer. Philadelphia will be having a meeting next week. And then we do have 2 golf outings coming up. So please make sure to get out there and support these outings. These outings support our educational foundation with our scholarships and our HARP relief fund. So it's important to participate and be part of these golf outings. So there's one down in Brandywine at the end of this month, and then we'll be in the Lehigh Valley at the Steel Club in July. We will be having regular chapter meetings throughout July, some Zoom, some will be in person. So please keep an eye out for that programming too. And as always, Serve Safe is top of my conversation as Director of Education. We do have classes going on this month. We do have some classes going on in July. So please take a look at that and take a look at some of the other online virtual learning that you could be adding to your training programs for your employees. And with that, I think Ben put in some information about the Philadelphia meeting. So please check that out on our website. And as Zach said, we will be taking a summer hiatus. As needed, we will be having webinars, and we are going to be promoting the webinars that the Department of Labor are going to be hosting regarding the tip wage regulations that are coming out in August. But we look forward to seeing you guys in September, and I don't see any other things in the chat, Lauren and Zach, but thanks everybody for sticking with us with this longer webinar today. All right, well, with that, let's sign off. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hope. Thank you, everybody.